I'm reading a paper titled The Last People I Thought of, Confinement, Concealment, and Captive Black Maternity. Kikuya Shakur was conceived in a freezing cold space adjacent to a courtroom. Her parents, Asada Shakur and Kamal Siddiqui, had become comrades through earlier involvement in the Harlem chapter of the Black Panther Party, but they were reunited when they were both indicted for a 1972 Bronx bank robbery. As the trial began, Asada's lawyer, her Aunt Evelyn, stressed that it had been impossible for her to adequately prepare since the prosecution hid basic facts about the case and Judge Gagliardi denied her request to postpone the proceedings. Shakur and Siddiqui refused to accept these obstructions of justice, so each day they told the jury exactly what was happening. That President Nixon had appointed Judge Gagliardi, that Judge Gagliardi had no trouble issuing a postponement to the Watergate defendants, and that they were being persecuted for their radical anti-racist politics. Each time they spoke, they were ceremonially dismissed and removed themselves from the courtroom. On most occasions, they escaped the grasp of the court marshals, who stood close and awaited any opportunities to attack them. But in her autobiography, Asada Shakur recounts one day when the marshals did not give her a chance to escort herself out. Before she could leave, they jumped on her and started brutalizing her in open court. After this, she and Siddiqui were banned from the courtroom and put into a freezing room next to it. Of course, marshals and guards regularly intruded on the space. They kept the door closed, even though Shakur and Siddiqui requested that it be left ajar for warmth. They opened the door without warning, just to stare at the two. Finally, they insisted that the door had to stay closed and locked Shakur and Siddiqui inside. Despite these intrusions, Shakur and Siddiqui began to enjoy the privacy. They discussed religion, politics, and even bringing a child into the world. They talked through the burden of raising Black children, especially Black children with incarcerated parents. They cultivated a relationship and found different ways of connecting to each other. Shakur even confronted her anxieties and fears about motherhood, some of which she had held since her teenage years. The security of the space was certainly not guaranteed, but in it, Shakur crafted a different text for mothering and an alternative genre of refusal. I use Asada Shakur's theorization of mothering as a departure point for this paper, which unpacks the ways that confinement to the freezing room in particular and captivity in general informed her relationship to reproducing life. At stake is an account of the ways that Black women held captive have mothered in ways that make use of the unpredictability, instability, and rupture that organize our worlds. I begin with some historical context about the moment in which Shakur considers having a child, and end with an analysis of how she frames her escape from the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey, asking what abolitionist meaning we can draw from her daughter's role in motivating her to flee. What could motherhood possibly mean for an incarcerated Black woman who was so proximate to and marked for death? In what ways can we explore Shakur's account of motherhood without romanticizing or alighting the terror that structured her life? What does mothering even mean when kinship is nullified? When, following Horton Spillers, the bonds between mother and child can be invaded at any given and arbitrary moment by the property relations? When the foundational tenets of a liberal conception of motherhood are stripped away, choice, privacy, and domesticity, for instance, what are we left with? When Shakur considered what it would mean to become a mother in 1973, she did so against the backdrop of Black cultural nationalist compulsory motherhood. Black nationalists insisted that an embrace of motherhood was inseparable from revolutionary Black womanhood. They discouraged Black women from being vocal about the demands of bearing and raising children, emphasizing its naturalness and arguing that women lost their value if they could not reproduce. Shakur's hesitancy about bringing a child into the world disrupted this conflation of woman with mother. In posing so many questions about having a child, she refuted a Black nationalist ideology that insisted that all women wanted to or even could mother. Of course, some Black women active in the Black liberation struggle fiercely contested this idea alongside her. In Double Jeopardy, To Be Black and Female, Frances Beale marks the glorification of motherhood as a white bourgeois political stance. She wrote, "Some young sisters who have never had to maintain a household and accept the confining role which this entails tend to romanticize, along with the help of a few brothers, this role of housewife and mother. Black women who have had to endure this kind of function as the sole occupation of their life are less apt to have these utopian visions." Women like Frances Beale, who broke away from organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, articulated a reproductive politics that diverged from both Black men and white women. Unlike Black men, they refused to unilaterally condemn all fertility control efforts as sterilization plans. And unlike white women, they insisted that legalizing abortion would not be a panacea for all women. The right to bear healthy children and to raise them out of poverty was equally important. Black women's theorizing and organizing around reproduction are instructive here as they reveal a preoccupation with sustaining Black life. Assata Shakur is not the only politically active pregnant Black woman to be incarcerated in this period. On November 8, 1969, the Black Panther printed a news story about 5 Panther women being held in a Connecticut jail on charges of conspiracy and murder. 3 were pregnant. Along with 8 Panther men, the women were held without bail, kept in isolation, refused exercise privileges, and denied visitors outside of their immediate families and lawyers. Even further, the pregnant women were slated to deliver their babies under heavily armed guard, babies who would be sent to foster homes afterward and kept there until their mothers could prove that they were capable of providing suitable homes. On July 19, 1971, Keisha Shakur, a member of the Third World Women's Alliance, was attending a hearing for a case involving her husband. The exact details surrounding her arrest are still unclear, but a special squad of Bronx detectives eventually took her into custody, where she awaited specific charges and the birth of her baby. She was 7 months pregnant. Writing from jail, she informed her sisters that 2 other women besides her were expecting children. Neither of them had been seen by a doctor or given proper prenatal care. Only after one of the sisters began to bleed was she taken to a hospital and treated for pregnancy, she wrote. With these accounts in mind, it is certainly worth asking what uses the state derived from criminalizing and imprisoning pregnant Black women. What symbolic value do pregnant Black women accrue in the late 1960s and early 70s? What kind of work does the figure of the pregnant and political Black woman do for the carceral state's narratives of Black female deviance? And finally, what pathways can we take to theorize gender for these women, given that several were either kept in men's prisons or subjected to solitary confinement in women's ones? Nearly every step of Assata Shakur's journey to have a child was marked by skepticism. From being reunited with the man that would become her child's father to forming an intimate and sexual relationship with him, she was uncertain about what motherhood could mean for her, especially since she faced life in prison if convicted of her many charges. The only guarantee was that the child would suffer. She was clear that they would enter the world without parents. Her words are, quote, "the child would have no mother and no father," end quote. This makes Assata's willingness to bear a child that much more intriguing. Her insistence on being about life reveals something about the meaning of motherhood for her in this moment, because the experience was sure to be punctuated by violence and abuse. Alexis Pauline Gumbs has written about the ways that Black mothers answer death with utopian futurity, resisting genocidal attacks on their ability to nurture themselves and the communities that they are a part of. The connection between birth and optimism is made apparent here. In this view, Black children reproduce an ongoing struggle, as Assata says, but they also produce a potential disruption to it. This is in direct opposition to how Black children are viewed under white supremacy, not as children at all, but as beings that are irretrievably predisposed to corruption, crime, and depravity as a result of being birthed by Black women. Placing value on Black childhood then works to invert a cruel logic on 2 levels. It insists that Black mothers be thought of as something other than vessels for corruption, but it also demands that Black children be thought of as occasions for celebration and joy. And yet, right alongside Assata's meditation on a joyous future sat images of a horrifying past, quote, "flogged and raped, bought and sold enslaved Black children," end quote, Black children forcefully separated from their parents, and Black children raised by extended kin when their parents were struggling. She reflected on what her ancestors thought when they brought their babies into this world, only able to imagine multiple iterations of violence that would reverberate into the present. This is the matrix within Black women are trapped for their reproductive lives, caught between wanting to create and sustain life and knowing that that life will be abbreviated. Shakur knew that any space she and Siddiqui crafted for themselves could be invaded sooner or later. That is, in the cold, cramped room that they confined themselves to for trial proceedings, a guard or marshal could have always opened the door. They could have tormented them and eavesdropped on their conversations. They could have yanked them out. They could have always insisted that Shakur and Siddiqui repeat the theatrics of trial and endure harassment or beatings in front of spectators in the courtroom every day. The liberal conception of privacy as a right accessible only to women who are not Black and poor does not hold here. The privacy that Shakur cultivated was one where 2 Black people could talk, laugh, question, cry, and love. The privacy that she devised granted them the space to, quote, "touch and hold each other," end quote. Here, each of them was like an oasis to the other. Here, they could have all the grace that they could imagine. Shakur began to embrace the possibility of motherhood only after she and Siddiqui tended to each other in this space. Before sharing the freezing room with him, she had spent most of her time in solitary confinement. She had closed up inside herself and forgotten how to relate in an open way with people. Building this relationship with him allowed her to reconnect with another human being, but it also made her vulnerable and open again. She reminded herself how much she enjoyed a person's touch and remembered that she had sexual desires. Even further, fashioning a relationship with Siddiqui and discussing sex with him granted Shakur the opportunity to reflect on just how opposed she had always been to becoming a mother. Quote, "I'm a revolutionary," I had said. "I don't have time to sit at home and make no babies," she remembered of her earlier self, end quote. Considering motherhood then brought Shakur closer to herself. It is important to note that at this stage in her life, she was rather burnt out from the demands of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. Her political philosophy shifted after exiting the party, and leaving gave her the space to think about the Black liberation struggle in a long-term sense. Winning quickly was no longer the goal, nor did she think it was possible. Instead, Shakur wanted to focus her energies on, quote, wearing down oppressors little by little, end quote. And she came to the realization that she was not a machine put only on earth to struggle. Following these shifts in how Shakur began to understand her role in the revolution, we can guess that her reasons for wanting to become a mother were not entirely selfless or divorced from the loneliness and despair she felt in prison. When a doctor falsely told her that she was threatening to abort, she lay on her cot and soothed herself by saying, "I couldn't lose this baby, not now. It was meant to be. This baby was our hope for the future." Her daughter, Kikuya, became a way for her to mark her loving relationship with Siddiqui, but she also became another manifestation of the revolutionary struggle, a sign that Shakur had been transformed in deeply personal ways by her political work. When those charged with executing the will of the state surrounded her, Shakur sought to live anyway. Though motherhood terrified her, she refused to let police officers, guards, prosecutors, or judges abbreviate her life or the life of her future children. She wrote, quote, "I am about life," I said to myself. "I'm going to live as hard as I can and as full as I can until I die. And I'm not letting these parasites, these oppressors, these greedy racist swine make me kill my children in my mind before they're even born. I'm going to live and I'm going to love Kemal, and if a child comes from that union, I'm going to rejoice. Because our children are our futures, and I believe in the future and in the strength and rightness of our struggle." Quote. So she relaxed and let nature take its course. Her words, not mine. She responded to the state's calculus with a fierce desire to reproduce life and regenerate the Black liberation struggle. Shakur refused the reproduction of Black maternal criminality, a logic the state regularly deploys to mark Black fertility as the cause for social problems. In a moment when state actors conspired to forcefully sterilize Black women across the U.S. en masse for fear that they might produce more of their kind, she offered a view of Black motherhood that subverted myths of pathology and pollution. In Shakur's view, if Black reproduction was a contaminant, it was one that held the possibility of destabilizing white supremacy with life and love and values. Shakur found it difficult to mother Kikuya up until the time she escaped from prison. At the age of 4, Kikuya and Shakur's mother visited at the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. On this particular visit, Shakur immediately noticed how distant and standoffish, puffed up and sullen the child was, and she knew precisely why. She had never been with her mother. She recalled the moment at Lynn. I go over and try to hug her. In a hot second, she is all over me. All I can feel are these little 4-year-old fists banging away at me. Every bit of her force is in those punches. They really hurt. I let her hit me until she is tired. It's all right, I tell her. Let it all out. She is standing in front of me, her face contorted with anger, looking spent. She backs away and leans against the wall. It's okay, I tell her. Mommy understands. You're not my mother, she screams, the tears rolling down her face. You're not my mother, and I hate you. I try to pick her up. She knocks my hand away. You can get out of here if you want to, she screams. You just don't want to. No, I can't, I say weakly. Yes, you can, she accuses. You just don't want to. Only after Kikuya expressed anger and frustration at her mother's imprisonment did Shakur feel compelled to escape. It was after seeing her daughter so angry and trying to show her the impenetrability of the prison bars that she, quote, decided that it was time to leave, end quote. By establishing Kikuya's outburst as the impetus for her escape, Shakur underscored the incompatibility of captivity and motherhood. She refused the prison, a cage, as the most appropriate place for Black women. She chose love and struggle over law and order. On the edge of incarceration, in the last place they thought of, lay a different kind of freedom. Shakur made escape about preserving her daughter's life. For certain, she was protesting the false charges and railroading that kept her in prison, but fleeing that New Jersey prison was her way of restoring a bond that the state had tried to permanently sever. This was no longer about appealing to the state or potential allies to argue her innocence, which she had been doing for years. Instead, escape was about destroying the system that thrived on the pain of Black women and girls. Getting, quote, through the bars, end quote, meant recognizing that there were spaces for breaking through. breaks for willing a different future into existence, chances to abolish this way of living.